Situation at an international airport in Europe. My parents and sister tricked me into handing over my passport and then abandoned me before a flight. Relationship. Daughter betrayed by her own parents and sister during a family trip. Emotional trigger. Sitting in airport detention with no passport, phone, or money when a powerful stranger unexpectedly offers help. Hook. The airport security room smelled like cold metal and stale coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly above me while two officers stood near the door speaking quietly in a language I didn't understand. I sat alone at a small gray table. No passport, no phone, no wallet, just the thin sweater I had thrown on that morning, still smelling faintly of the hotel laundry soap. Through the glass wall I could see travelers walking freely through the terminal, rolling suitcases. Boarding calls echoing over loudspeakers, people moving toward destinations. And me, stuck. Because my own parents and sister had just taken my passport and disappeared onto a plane without me. Have you ever realized the people you trusted most had planned something behind your back? I stared down at my empty hands. That's when the detention room door opened quietly. A tall man stepped inside, wearing a dark coat and a calm expression. He leaned slightly toward me and whispered something unexpected. "Pretend you're with me. My jet is waiting." Then he smiled faintly. "Trust me, they'll regret this." 12 hours earlier, I still believed it was a family vacation. That's what my mother had called it. "A little reset," she said over the phone when she invited me. "We haven't all had time together in years." Her voice sounded soft, almost careful. That should have warned me. In my family, careful usually meant calculated. Still, I said yes. Because some part of me kept hoping distance had made us kinder to each other. That maybe time had softened the old patterns. It hadn't. The trip started normally enough. A rented apartment near the city center, narrow streets below the balcony, the smell of espresso drifting up every morning. My sister took photos of everything. My mother kept commenting on how nice it was to finally have me with them again. But even from the first night, something felt slightly off. My parents whispered more than usual. My sister kept asking oddly specific questions. Did you bring your passport with you every day? Where are you keeping your wallet? Do you still use Face ID on your phone? At the time, I laughed it off. Tourist questions, travel anxiety, family noise. Have you ever ignored the warning signs simply because you wanted peace more than truth? The last morning began with a rush. Our flight home had been moved earlier. My father knocked on my hotel room door before sunrise, telling me to hurry. I threw clothes into my suitcase, half awake, while my mother kept calling from the hallway, "Bring your documents. We can organize everything at the airport." At the terminal, the air felt cold and overly bright. Screens flickered with departure times. Suitcases rolled over polished floors. My sister walked ahead with my parents, then turned back and smiled. "Give me your passport," she said. "I'll hold all the boarding documents together." It was such a small moment. Such an ordinary sentence. And because families build betrayal out of ordinary moments, I handed it to her. That was the last time I held it. At first, I didn't realize what had happened. We reached the security area, and my father suddenly frowned and said, "Wait here, we're checking something with the desk." My mother touched my arm lightly. "Don't move." Then the three of them walked away. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I texted my sister. No reply. I called my mother. Straight to voicemail. When I finally rushed to the airline desk, breathless and confused, I heard my own voice asking the same question over and over. They were right here. My passport was with them, my family, they were right here. The woman behind the counter looked at me with that careful, practiced expression people use when they think the answer will hurt. "Ma'am," she said softly, "their flight has boarded." Boarded. Not delayed. Not waiting. Gone. That's when the real panic began. Because my family hadn't just left me behind. They had left with the only proof that I was allowed to leave at all. At first, I thought it was a misunderstanding. Something simple, something temporary. Families don't just abandon each other in foreign airports, right? I stood at the airline counter gripping the cold metal edge while the employee checked her screen again. "Your ticket was used," she said gently. "Your family boarded the flight." "But my passport," I whispered. "They have my passport." She paused. That pause told me everything. Without a passport, I wasn't just delayed. I was undocumented. Airport security arrived within minutes. Not aggressive, just procedural. Calm voices asking careful questions while people around us kept moving toward their gates. "Where's your passport?" "Who has it?" "Why would your family take it?" Questions that sounded simple but felt impossible to answer. How do you explain betrayal to strangers? How do you describe the moment when the people who raised you suddenly become the people who trap you? They escorted me to a small office near the terminal. The same gray room I now sat in. The officer across the table tapped his pen against a form. "Miss, we contacted the airline. Your family departed an hour ago." "An hour?" My sister had my passport. My mother had my wallet. And my father had my phone charger, which meant my phone would die soon. Have you ever watched your safety disappear piece by piece? My phone battery blinked red 3%. I texted my sister. "Why did you take my passport?" No response. Then I called my mother. One ring. Then voicemail. The battery died before I could try again. The room felt colder after that. Without a passport, I couldn't board a flight. Without identification, I couldn't leave the airport. Without money, I couldn't even get a hotel. I was stuck between borders. Not arrested. Not free. Just suspended. Hours passed. People came and went through the room. Travelers with visa issues, a man arguing loudly about luggage, a couple who had lost documents. But no one stayed long. Except me. By evening, the officer returned and sat down across from me again. "Until we verify your identity," he said carefully, "you'll remain here." Remain here. I looked down at the empty table. No phone. No passport. No way to contact anyone. That's when the door opened. A tall man stepped inside with airport staff behind him. He wasn't loud or hurried. Just calm. The kind of calm that makes everyone else in the room slightly adjust their posture. He glanced around once, then his eyes settled on me. And slowly he walked over. The man didn't look like the other travelers who had passed through the room that day. Most people who came through detention carried panic with them. Raised voices, fast explanations, nervous gestures. This man carried none of that. He moved slowly, almost casually, his long dark coat brushing lightly against the back of the chair as he sat across from me. For a moment, he didn't speak. He simply studied me. Not in a rude way. More like someone observing a problem they were quietly solving. Have you ever met someone who seemed completely unaffected by the chaos around them? One of the airport officers approached him quickly. "Sir, we'll resolve this situation shortly," the officer said politely. The tone surprised me. It wasn't the tone people use with ordinary travelers. The man nodded slightly. "I'm sure you will." His voice was low and calm. Then he leaned forward slightly so only I could hear him. "Your family took your passport." It wasn't a question. I nodded slowly. "Yes." He glanced toward the officers, then back at me. "Phone?" "Dead." "Wallet?" "With my mother." For the first time, something faintly resembling a smile appeared on his face. not amusement. Recognition. Efficient, he murmured. The word startled me. Efficient? I must have looked confused because he tilted his head slightly. People rarely plan betrayals well, he said quietly. Yours did. Have you ever had a stranger describe your situation more clearly than anyone you know? I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. The man leaned closer, lowering his voice even further. Listen carefully. My heart began beating faster. Pretend you're with me, he whispered. I blinked. My jet is waiting, he continued calmly. And right now airport security believes you're a passenger who lost documentation. That sounded impossible. Private jets didn't solve immigration problems. Laws didn't bend because someone owned a plane. Maybe he saw the doubt in my face, because he leaned back slightly and smiled. Cold, confident, the kind of smile that suggested he understood the system much better than I did. Trust me, he said quietly. Then he glanced toward the officers and added one final sentence. And when we leave here, your family will regret this mistake. For the first time all day, I felt something other than fear. Curiosity, because something told me this man wasn't just offering help. He was offering consequences. For a few seconds, I just stared at him. The room felt strangely quiet again, even though the airport outside was still moving with its usual rhythm of boarding calls and rolling suitcases. A private jet. A stranger. An impossible offer. Have you ever had a moment where logic told you to be careful but instinct told you something else? The officer returned to the table with another form. Sir, we'll just need a few minutes, he said politely to the man. The man nodded calmly. Then he looked back at me. Your name? He asked quietly. I told him. He repeated it once, almost thoughtfully, like he was placing it somewhere in memory. Then he stood. When he stood, the energy in the room shifted again. It was subtle but unmistakable. The officers straightened slightly. One of them stepped forward immediately. Mr. Laurent, we're still handling the documentation issue. Laurent. The name meant nothing to me at first. But the way they said it did. Careful but respectful. Almost nervous. The man Laurent nodded once. I'm aware. He placed a simple black folder on the table. Inside were a few documents I couldn't see clearly. The officer scanned the first page, then the second. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Understood, sir, the officer said. Have you ever watched authority quietly step aside for someone else? Laurent turned slightly toward me. Stand up, he said softly. I hesitated only a second before doing it. The officer looked between us. Then he gave a short nod. She can leave with you. Just like that. Hours of detention gone in a sentence. Laurent picked up his folder and walked toward the door without looking back. I followed. The hallway outside felt brighter after the gray room. People moved around us without noticing anything unusual. But my mind was still catching up. Why are you helping me? I asked, once we reached the quieter corridor leading toward a private terminal. He didn't slow his pace. Because I dislike watching unfair situations go uncorrected. That sounded too simple. We reached a set of glass doors where two security staff stepped aside immediately. Outside, on a distant private runway, a sleek white jet waited under the fading evening light. Laurent stopped walking and finally looked at me again. Your family made a mistake today, he said calmly. Then he added quietly, they assumed you had no one powerful enough to respond. The private terminal was almost silent. No crowds, no loud announcements, just the distant hum of engines somewhere across the runway and the faint smell of aviation fuel in the evening air. The jet waited at the far end of the glass corridor. Sleek, quietly expensive. I slowed my steps for a moment. Have you ever walked towards something that felt unreal simply because the day had already been too strange to explain? Laurent noticed. First time on a private jet? He asked calmly. I nodded. Yes. He didn't smile. Instead, he studied me for a moment the same way he had in the detention room. You're still thinking about them, he said. Not a question. A statement. Of course I was. My parents. My sister. The people who had planned this entire situation. The morning suddenly replayed in my mind with uncomfortable clarity. My father rushing me at the hotel. My sister insisting she hold the passports. My mother telling me to wait near security. Small details. Perfectly timed. A plan that only worked because they knew I trusted them. Have you ever realized betrayal only works when someone knows exactly how much trust you're willing to give? Laurent opened the aircraft door and stepped aside. After you. Inside, the cabin was quiet and warm, the leather seats soft under the dim lighting. For a moment, I simply stood there, trying to understand why a stranger had changed the direction of my entire day. Laurent sat across from me as the door closed behind us. Then he spoke again. Tell me something, he said calmly. Why would your own family go to that much effort just to leave you behind? The question hung in the air. Because deep down, I already suspected the answer. The jet began to move slowly along the runway. A soft vibration traveled through the cabin floor as the engines warmed, low and steady. Outside the window, the airport lights blurred into long golden lines. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Laurent waited patiently. Not pushing. Just observing. Have you ever noticed how the right question can sit in the room long enough that silence eventually answers it? I finally looked up. My parents think I'm wealthy, I said quietly. Laurent's eyebrow lifted slightly. Think. I nodded. My grandfather left an inheritance for me, a large one. The words felt strange to say out loud, because I had never talked about it openly before. My family found out last year, I continued. Since then, everything changed. My sister began calling more often. My parents suddenly wanted to reconnect. Family dinners, invitations, travel plans. All the things they hadn't shown interest in for years. At the time, I thought maybe they had simply missed me. Have you ever wanted to believe something so badly that you ignored the obvious truth? Laurent leaned back slightly in his seat. So the trip was arranged after they learned about the inheritance. And now your passport is gone, he said calmly. I nodded again. They probably planned to keep it until they could pressure me. Laurent didn't look surprised. In fact, he looked almost unsurprised. Financial leverage, he said quietly. Very common tactic. The jet accelerated suddenly, lifting smoothly into the dark sky. For the first time all day, the weight in my chest eased slightly. Laurent looked out the window for a moment. Then back at me. You understand something now, he said. That today wasn't about abandonment. He paused. It was about control. The jet climbed smoothly above the clouds. Below us, the airport lights faded into tiny sparks of gold scattered across the dark ground. For the first time since that morning, I could breathe normally again. Laurent poured a glass of water and placed it in front of me. "Your family will contact you soon," he said calmly. "Probably very soon." I looked at him. "Why?" He leaned back slightly in his seat. "Because their plan only works if you stay powerless." The words settled quietly between us. Have you ever noticed how quickly people panic when the control they expected suddenly disappears? Without my passport, they believed I would be trapped. Scared. Dependent. But now I was thousands of feet above the same airport where they had left me behind. Laurent glanced out the window again. Then he said something that made the entire day finally make sense. People who try to trap others rarely expect someone else to open the door. I thought about my parents. My sister. The careful plan they had built. And how easily it had already begun to collapse. Because the truth was simple. They believed they had abandoned me. But in reality, they had just created the moment that freed me from them completely.